Yes, I am. Let me start at the beginning. Robert, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Montana. I always have to preface that with that. But I was one year and 6 days old when I left, moved to northern Utah, and spent all of my formative years in the beautiful Cache Valley on the Utah-Idaho border. Met my wife, Rhonda, at high school, and tried to persuade her I was more interested in chick pigs. He has not gone.
I see the crystal raindrops fall, and the beauty of it all is when the sun comes shining through.
Well, that's great. You
To make those rainbows in my mind when I think of you sometime, and I want to spend some time with you. Just the two
I
of
was going to
us.
ask you about
We can make it if we try. The two of us. Just the two of us.
Really a bullshitter.
You're a total bullshitter.
Yes.
I see not much has
am
changed.
now.
Well, tell me, what kinds of things did you do in high school? I feel like I saw on Facebook that you had something to do with the radio station.
I was a radio announcer a little bit in the last year of high school, but that became my job after I left high school. Through most of college and all of law school, I was a radio announcer. Loved radio, would be doing it today as a job if you could make a living in the medium.
And what kind of announcing were you doing?
I was initially working at the college station, and then went to work for a small market 5,000 watt station, KVNU, the voice of northern Utah, and became kind of the de facto news director there. And then when I went to law school, I went to work for the college station there, and I was a news announcer for KUAT radio.
Now, what took you to law school? What got you interested in law?
A 1968 Dodge Dart. No, that's... I went to...
You know, I was only 2 years old then.
Ooh, burn.
I just couldn't resist.
Yeah, thank you. I knew with absolute certainty what I was going to be when I grew up. All through junior high and high school, when you took those aptitude tests, I chose the answers to the questions to get to what I intended to be when I grew up, which was a chemist. And it was the third year of college when I was in, any chemists in the crowd, anybody who took analytical chemistry? The lab, I realized in the middle of the night, one night, I turned to my lab partner and said, you know what, and pardon me, and I'm sorry that this is being videotaped, but in the interest of verisimilitude, I need to say, turned to my lab partner and said, I just realized I don't give a flying fuck how many calories are in that sample. Closed up my lab book, left. The next morning I withdrew from all of my chemistry classes. I still needed to graduate in 4 years because you were a failure if you didn't graduate in 4 years. So what can you get a degree in if you already have 2 years in the sciences and you're no longer going to be a scientist? And the answer is political science. And it wasn't until a year later, after I finally told my fiance that I had withdrawn from all of my classes, that I thought, what am I going to do with a political science degree? I guess I'm going to have to go to law school. So I applied just before the end deadline, and the rest was sort of history.
How many schools did you apply to?
3.
3?
Oh, I'm sorry, 4.
I'm assuming you got into all 4.
One of them, the University of Denver. Any University of Denver alum here? The University of Denver told me on the phone that if I had been accepted somewhere else, I should accept that because it's very difficult to get into the University of Denver. So I told them, okay, I got accepted to one, and I never heard from them again.
Interesting.
But the other 3 I did get admitted to.
Now, when you were in law school, what kind of a lawyer did you picture yourself being? I'll bet it isn't what you're doing now.
It is absolutely not what I'm doing now. I was going to be a natural resources lawyer. I took water law and mining law and all of the related things. That was still on the bar in Arizona when I took the bar. Water and mining law, by the way. And I worked as a research assistant to the professor who had taught water law for many years, Robert Emmett Clark. Robert Emmett, I think, is a name that some of you will recognize. And I think he hired me because my full name is Robert Bruce. I'm not quite sure. And then I graduated.
Robert the Bruce.
Robert the Bruce. And I graduated from law school, and that's the first time it occurred to me that there's nobody hiring a water law attorney or a mining law attorney except for mines. And they didn't want me, I didn't want them. So
What year did you graduate from law school?
1976.
Okay. So that was about 8 years before elder law started, I think.
Yeah, I think the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys was formed, if I recall correctly, in 1985. I think that was the year they were incorporated.
So when you got out of law school, what kind of law were you doing?
Mostly juvenile law. And after I was appointed to represent kids in juvenile court, after I had been out for about 2.5, 3 years, I got a political sinecure as a city magistrate and no longer had to hustle to make a living. That, for any of you who are interested in whether you want to be a judge, that was the absolute easiest job I have ever held. And I've held a lot of jobs in different industries. Any judge who tells you it's hard is just wrong.
How did you get the job? You said political, so you had to be appointed?
I had some connections in the Democratic Party, and the city council was mostly Democratic, and I had the attention and approval of the chief city magistrate, who happened to be a Republican, so he pulled the Republican votes on the council.
You had to have both.
I didn't really have to have both, and it's a really long and ultimately boring story, and I'll tell it to anybody who buys me another Manhattan. But,
it's got a big whistle pig, though. Yeah.
But it was mostly the Republicans who ultimately got me on the bench.
Interesting. So give us an idea of what you were doing as this juvenile.
In juvenile
we know
court,
you're a juvenile.
in juvenile court, I did dependencies and criminal matters for juveniles, delinquencies in the Arizona statute. In the city magistrate's job, I did parking tickets and red lights and speeding tickets, and the big time stuff was DUIs, shoplifting, and prostitution. Those were if you got one of those on your docket, it was like woohoo.
So give me an idea then of how you morphed from doing that to, I think your next iteration was you were the public guardian.
That's exactly right. That's how I morphed. I had become friends with in Arizona, there is a county office called the public fiduciary. For those of you who have in your states a public guardian or of the person, or a public conservator of the estate, or a public administrator for probates, in Arizona they rolled all three of those jobs into one county office because of Sandra Day O'Connor, interestingly, footnote. And I was friends socially with the second public fiduciary in Pima County, which is Tucson. And when he decided to leave that to go set up a private fiduciary business, he said to me, "You should apply for this. You'd be good at this, and you might actually get the job." And I did.
And how many years did you do it?
5 years.
And what was involved in that? You had how many, what would you call them?
Wards. Cases. Because I had a kind of an expansive view of the position, so we had 850 cases on our caseload, but about 600 and some of those were just acting as representative payee and not having any other responsibilities. So something like 150 to 200 guardianships, conservatorships, and probate matters, a staff of 21 people. I was a county department head. You had to be a lawyer to get the job, and I remember asking my boss, the assistant county manager, if he thought that I had taken a class in managing people or managing finances or making guardianship decisions. Why did they require it to be a lawyer? I don't really know, but thank God they did, because that really cut down the pool of applicants.
At the end of the 5 years, I think maybe that's when you started being a trustee or otherwise a fiduciary.
Alan, the guy who had been the public fiduciary before me, had 5 years outside, well, actually 6 years outside the job, and has become pretty wealthy and successful and had a big practice. And I looked around and said, well, if he can do that, I can do that. So I kind of followed his lead and went out and started practicing without any idea who was going to come see me or what I was going to do for sure. But I was pretty sure that I wanted to act as trustee or guardian or conservator. And sure enough, that business took off very quickly.
I've got more questions about that, but is that Alan, does that happen to be the same Alan Bogutz?
It does.
And Alan is the reason that NALA and the Special Needs Alliance are all
Alan was the second president of NALA.
And that's when they hired the management team and...
So that somebody had put, this is a little NALA tidbit for those of you who don't know this story, somebody had put a squib in the Parade magazine. Y'all remember Parade magazine in the Sunday newspaper? There was like a piece about a paragraph and a half or 2 paragraphs long that said people who are trying to figure out how to navigate their older years and don't have a lawyer might want to know about this new entity called the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, headquartered at this address in Tucson, Arizona, which was Alan's office address. And in the next 2 months, he got something like 30,000 mail letters. He said, I learned so much about the way people's minds work. About 10% of them didn't have a stamp on them, so that NALA ended up paying the postage on a huge number of envelopes. And he hired his mother-in-law to come and respond to every one of them, and quickly realized there needed to be a management company involved.
When did you get involved in NALA?
I stayed away from it because my friend and friendly competitor, I figured it was his thing. But when they had their first national meeting, happened to be in Tucson, the other reason that a management company was necessary, in the fall of 1986, I guess it was the spring of '86, I went to the meeting and the energy was terrific. And so then I joined and still am a member. What can I say?
Yeah, that's great. And so then you met all the people that you know in the Special Needs Alliance there. And I don't want to skip around too much, Robert, but I know you're one of the 10 original founding members of the Special Needs Alliance. And essentially that grew out of NALA, didn't it?
So how much of this do you want?
As much as you want.
So how many of you remember the programs, the NALA programs? Yeah, they were terrific. I just don't know why they stopped doing them. Well, I kind of know, but I don't know why they didn't figure out a way to do them. One of the things that went on at the programs at some point was Lee Holmes had this idea. He would send a personal invitation to about 8 people and say, I want you to come a day early to the program. Bring all of your financials, bring everything that you have, any planning, strategic planning documents you've done, any online stuff. Those were in the early days of the internet. And we're going to have a kind of a special meeting where we're going to bare our souls. And if you come to one of these groups, you're going to have the best executive committee to run your office, but you have to be on everybody else's executive committee too. And one of those, I wasn't involved in any of those, but one of those sessions, the 8 people or whatever it was, decided to keep doing. And that group of 8 or 9 core people, not including Lee, oddly, became what many of you know of today as the Moose Group or the Elder Law Alliance. And after they had had a year's experience, they foolishly invited me to join them. And that group was where the Special Needs Alliance was birthed out of the Elder Law Alliance. And also how it got its name, because we said, well, we want to do special needs. Well, what should we call ourselves? Well, we're the Elder Law Alliance. We'd better call ourselves the Special Needs Alliance.
That's great. So I remember learning that it was really Dennis Christensen's idea. And I'm trying to picture that. Is this a big conversation you're all having and Dennis just says, I know what we're going to do?
No. We kind of came at it the other direction. And interestingly, Lawrence is here and he might correct me. I don't think anybody else that was in that room is in this room, but it was at this resort. It was over in the Vanderbilt wing. If anybody, oh, I'm sorry, I completely forgot. Who's got room 6020 in the Salmons building? Because I'm going to be over at your place at about 7 tonight. And no, we have your key, whoever it is. Sorry. We had meetings over in the Vanderbilt building. This was our annual Moose Group meeting, and one of our number, Geraldine Champion, was famous for saying all the time, what I want this group to do is show me ways that I can make money while I sleep. And so in furtherance of that conversation, we had a U-shaped table arrangement, and we were going around the table talking about ways we could learn to make money while we sleep. And Tom Bagley said, you know, one of the things that I really am having trouble with is I've tied in with a bunch of these structured settlement people and personal injury lawyers, and I've been involved in a couple of mass torts, and a lot of people need special needs trusts for their plaintiffs, but they're scattered all over the country. Could we somehow sell trusts across the country or run a referral service, maybe charge? And Dennis Christensen said, I have exactly the same problem. I have a couple of personal injury lawyers who have tried to contact me about very large mass torts, and I can't help them in, you know, pick a state, in Utah or Missouri or wherever, because I don't know enough people well there. And so that conversation proceeded a little while, and at some point we said, what we should do is have a subcommittee to develop a business plan for something like that. Tom obviously should be on it. Dennis should be on it. Anybody else here done mass torts? And I'd been involved in one that had generated about 8 personal special needs trusts. And that's a terrific story in its own, but not germane to this. And so I raised my hand and said, I will. So that 3 of us became a committee to propose a business plan for what became the Special Needs Alliance. And it's my recollection that we adopted it in Charleston a year later. And I'm checking Lawrence to see if he nods his head. And that would have been 20 years ago, 22 years ago-ish. 2001.
Well, the Alliance started in 2002.
So that would be when
about
we
2001 or something.
Yeah, that's when we met in Charleston, and then Tom Bagley is this very aggressive organizer. The fall meeting of NALA that year, just after we had met, was in Boston, and Tom rented a room in the hotel and sent out an invitation to one person from every state that he could think of to come and learn about it. And it turned out to be a pitch. We ended up having memberships that looked a little bit like timeshares, and we sold 40 people, I think, were in that room, maybe. So those 40 people were the first members of the Special Needs Alliance.
Well, and you remember that's why I'm a member, because Scott Severance said no.
I wasn't going to.
That's, you know,
unlike
my
you,
claim to fame
I'm
is
withholding
I was
those
the second
digs.
choice.
Yeah.
Well, my recollection of the beginning of the Special Needs Alliance is that there was a lot of talk about marketing, and then I feel like we morphed fairly quickly within a few years to being more about education. And now I feel like we're kind of coming full circle with that, aren't we? Because we've been educating ourselves, each other, we've been making a name for ourselves, and now it's really ended up being the marketing bonanza that we pictured it being from the beginning, wouldn't you say?
Yes, we in the first year or two, we hired a marketing company, somebody that Jay Kearns knew out of Connecticut. But the real reason, a little insight into the history of the SNA. So as Tom and Dennis and I are putting together the business plan, we say, well, we're going to have to charge dues or membership or something. How much should we charge? So we considered, well, what do you have to pay to be an ACTAC fellow? What do you have to pay to be a NALA member? It needs to be more than either of those. Okay, $3,000. Good, sounds good. What are we going to do with $3,000 times 50 members? And that became, well, let's hire a marketing company. It was really sort of the tail wagging the dog rather than the other direction. And that was an early first effort that, in my view, was not terribly successful. We didn't have a real picture of what the marketing would look like. But once we figured out that we could do education and have meetings in connection with the annual Stetson meeting at a significant savings, Stetson gave us the room at Stetson University, at the law school, and even catered our meetings. And so we really we had far less cost to put together really good meetings. That became, I agree with you, that became the primary goal.
I want to get back to your law practice and your fiduciary practice because I've got a whole bunch of questions about that. And then if we have time, I want to talk about retirement. And I think you got a lot to share with all of us about these things. But tell me about the early stages of your fiduciary practice. You had a real leg up with that because you came from the public guardian's office. And I think that meant you had kind of a built-in fiduciary practice from the beginning when you wanted it. Would you agree?
I did. I had credibility that I had not had in my first iteration right after law school. Who was I? I was just some punk kid from Utah who was trying to make a name for himself in the desert. And on the second go-round after the two public, I can't diminish the value of being a judge. I still have Judge Fleming, the sign on my bench hanging on the wall just for I've tried to throw it away several times, and my legal assistant keeps pulling it out of the garbage. But that credibility brought people in the door from the get-go.
So when you first started this fiduciary practice, how many cases did you have, and what did that mean for you in terms of how much staff you had to have to make that work?
So while I was still at the public fiduciaries, I had given my notice, I had an end date. Somebody called up the public fiduciary's office to see if we would become guardian for their father, I think it was. It might have been both father and mother, but anyway, the caseworker said, well, we're not an alternative to family. Families should do it first. Oh, we just can't do it. But you realize we're a government agency. Oh, well, we don't love turning mom and dad over to a government agency. And the case intake person said, it happens that the public fiduciary is going to be setting up a private practice in about 4 days. Do you want to talk to him? And they said, oh, God, that would be great. So I had my first case as I was walking out the door. But I only had one part-time legal assistant who did paperwork, pleadings for me, as my only employee. And it was about 6 months before I bit the bullet and said, I've got to hire somebody. I hired one of the case workers from the public fiduciary's office, and the die was cast. I firmly believe, and I say to everybody, including my partner Elizabeth, who's sitting there 30 years later, she's 30 years younger than me, 30 plus years younger than me. I say this to her all the time. It's really a variant of you build it and they will come. I learned from that very first hire that if you hire good people who do the work, I mean, that's always a challenge, of course, but if you do that, they pay for themselves from the get-go. And that was absolutely the case with that first hire. She didn't have enough work to keep her busy, and yet within 6 months, she was overwhelmed, and we had a much larger caseload.
So you bring in the business, you're bringing in the fees, and then you can hire the next person.
Yep.
Did you ever have nervousness about, I'm going to hire too many people, and I'm not going to be able to pay them all? or maybe worse yet, you're not going to be able to pay yourself because you have to pay them.
I was less worried about the ability to pay than I was worried about becoming too big of an institution and losing our soul. And it seemed to me and my law school classmate, who I had been partners with during that first year, a guy named Tom Curdy, we were still talking, still maybe we were going to get back together. And it seemed to both of us that Alan Bogutz had done that. I'm not being critical of him, and I have a very different view at this point. But he had grown very quickly into a very large organization, and it felt like they had become somewhat institutional. So Tom and I ended up looking for a place to practice law together, and we chose a converted house, largely because it would not allow us to have more than about 10 employees. It just wasn't big enough. And that
Until
was
you
our
started
way.
buying up the neighborhood.
That was our way of keeping small. And then that's the punchline. We ended up buying the building down the alley so that we could house all our staff. And we were pretty quickly the same size as the public fiduciary and the same size as Alan Bogutz in his practice.
Now, your fiduciary practice these days dwarfs what you had back then.
Oh, yes.
So how do you do that without losing your soul, as you said?
It really is, you should probably drag Elizabeth up here to answer that question, because it's a real challenge for the future as well. And I think it's, my best answer is that we all, including the younger people in the firm, have tried to inculcate a value of maintaining respect for the autonomy of the subjects of our work. An awful lot of professional fiduciary organizations, including the public offices that I see, seem to me to have developed if you come to us, we're in charge and we know what's best kind of approach. And we try really hard to not do that. It's incredibly tempting, and it's very easy in the back halls to make fun of the family members who are self-interested and overreaching and whatever, and to not recognize that we can sometimes be self-interested and overreaching ourselves. So we try really hard to not do that. It's not perfect, but it's what we got.
I'm full of questions, so I hope I'm not going to be too scattered, but I'm thinking, how do you sell your...
I'm not drinking as fast as you. I'm not drinking as fast as you.
No, you're not. You're doing most of the talking, so. How do you sell yourself as a fiduciary? You don't want to get a case because you sold yourself. You want to get the case, I guess, because it's a good fit, right? That's part of keeping your soul.
Right.
So how do you grow the business? How do you sell yourself in your way of doing it?
Well, and there's a real problem that you can hear a story and think, that story is perfect for us. We can solve that problem. We can really help this person. And they have $50,000. And we've got to say, oh, we can't do this on a $50,000 case. And then we end up taking it anyway, is pretty much the answer. You have to, and this has worked for us historically, you have to take a step back and say, I'm not going to sell ourselves. I'm going to tell you what we do. And if you think our prices are high or we're not the perfect fit, great, let us help you find somebody who's better. Let us not convince you that we really are better, though in fact we are better than the people that they end up choosing. But we're not going to try to persuade people usually.
You probably won't remember this, Robert, but I got a lot of good advice from our original director of the Arc of Indiana Pooled Trust. He was a real curmudgeon, which I respect. I like that. Because you're getting a straight answer from him. And I talked to him about this very same issue, and he said he actively discouraged people from using the Arc Trust. He told him all the bad things about using the Arc. You got your fees. We're not always going to say yes. He'd go on and on about all the negative things. And if they chose to use the Arc Trust, then they were always the happy customers.
We do a variant of that. I can't even tell you how many times I have said, we are the worst possible guardians or agents on healthcare powers of attorney because we're institutional. We don't know you like your family knows you. Don't really say the same thing about finances because it's not really true, but we try very aggressively to not get cases, and then exactly as you say, if it turns out well or even not too bad, then they think they scored, they did great.
Now, obviously, you're going to get cases that you thought would be okay when you took on the case, but it ends up being like the horror stories we all tell. So, so I have a few questions about that. If you have a difficult beneficiary of a trust or a difficult ward, what do you do about that?
What's your next question? It's really hard, and I'm calling out to people in my office that we have one right now who has objected to our final accounting. We finally said, you know what? We will give you back every penny we have collected in fees. We will turn everything over to you. We will cheerfully participate in terminating the trust. Your expectations are unreasonable, and she won't stop. She's still in there. So we've actually not only given her back all the fees, but hired a lawyer to respond to her objections. It's not that we are scared of what she's saying, because she is demonstrably, obviously mentally ill, and we will prevail in all of the legal proceedings, but it's a huge morass to navigate. And that happens. That's actually, she's kind of the second one of those. So I think that the takeaway from that, because the two that we've had both involved unhappy divorces. So I think what we've learned is don't agree to act as trustee for a spouse in an unhappy divorce. Even though you can help them, they don't see it that way.
The other side of that coin, it seems to me, is concern about whether you might do something wrong as a fiduciary. And I don't know if I was going to ask you this question if it weren't for all that we've seen happening over the last weeks or months with a big national trust company that will go unnamed. But what I thought was interesting about that is when the SHIT hit the fan on that, then all of our colleagues here started piping up about the bad actors in their state who had done things as a trustee or as any other kind of fiduciary. And I have experience with that in Indiana. Our Shane Service in Indiana stole a bunch of money from these poor special needs beneficiaries of trusts, and he is finally repaying these trusts now, I'm glad to say. He must not be earning a whole lot of money since he can't be a lawyer anymore. We're getting small checks for each of those trusts every month. But what do you do in your office to prevent either the thought that you might be doing something wrong or the actuality that you might do something wrong? What do you do about your fiduciary practice to make that so it's impossible that there would be wrongdoing in your office?
Impossible is a pretty strong word. Unlikely, though, I'm okay with living with unlikely. I can handle that level of risk. And we do that really by that same reinforcement of values. We one time years ago, not that many years ago, I guess Elizabeth was involved, so less than 10 years ago, we hired 2 new employees in the same week. We liked the 2 applicants for a secretarial position, and so we just hired them both. And within about 2-3 weeks, cash started disappearing from the envelopes at the front desk. And it might have been that one of our beneficiaries came in and figured out where the cash was and took it. And it might have been that either of these 2 new employees took the money. It could have been that some longtime employee had suddenly started taking money. But we just fired both of the new employees that week. The first inkling that we had there was a problem. We just couldn't tolerate it. And we made sure that everybody in the office knew that that's why they were no longer there. Not that we accused them of stealing, but that our anxiety about the structure of the office was that important. And that was a pretty salutary experience, actually. I think that worked well.
You have some insurance, don't you? I think you have insurance on the employees so that if they steal money.
We do. We have, what's it called? Faithful employees? No, that's not right. But that's a relatively modest, first of all, it's a rider on your regular business policy. And that, most regular business policies have some small amount of faithful performance. Is that what it's called? Faithful performance. Typically $10,000 or $20,000. And so we inquired and got a rider on that for, I think we're probably at $100,000 or some number like that. We also have consciously chosen our legal malpractice carrier for understanding that we have a fiduciary business. The first time we were with CNA, I'm not hesitant to share names. The first time that we filled out the practice area concentration form for CNA, there wasn't a place for acting as fiduciary, so I hand wrote it in and said 40 or 50% of our business is acting as fiduciary. And they called up and said, what are you talking about acting as fiduciary? And I said, well, we act as trustee, we act as conservator. Oh, you mean estate planning and probate and trust? I said, well, yeah, but we act as fiduciary. And they said, no, put that under estate and trust. And so we were a little anxious whether they would actually cover us. And so we went out and got fiduciary insurance. There is such a thing. And then not too long after that, we actually got sued for fiduciary malpractice. I'm very proud to say that the case was very easily disposed of, though there is an appellate decision that has my name on it. I'm sad about that, but we prevailed. And CNA covered it. And so we still have this fiduciary insurance, and we're not quite sure why, but we're afraid to stop it. Did that answer your question, or was that just
Absolutely.
me going down memory lane?
Can you think of anything else that you're doing to prevent those kinds of problems from happening?
Well, we have office controls, so we have a different person opening the mail from the one who makes the deposit, and we log all outgoing checks and things that your accountant would like you to do and an auditor would require you to do if you had a formal audit. Though we've never done a formal audit, we've talked about whether we think that might be worth doing. But it's really systems and oversight. When I was a very young lawyer, before the Public Fiduciary's Office, an older lawyer that I knew had recently started having financial setbacks, and he mentioned to his legal assistant that he was really having a hard time making ends meet, and she loaned him money, and come to find out that she had emptied his client trust accounts and was loaning him his client trust money back, and that made a significant impression on me.
Wow. We're running out of time much faster than I was thinking we would, and I haven't asked you anything about retirement. I know you're in the process of that in a way. I don't know what would be helpful for this group.
It was good of you to wait till Elizabeth left the room, by the way. But there's a tape, so...
That's right. She can watch it later and see what you said about her. But what would you recommend for those of us that are thinking, how far in advance did you think about retirement, and what did that start to look like for you at the beginning of thinking about it?
So I'm 71. No, I'll be 72. I have to look at my wife. She's much older, by the way. She's 70. She'll be 73 in a week or 10 days. And so I keep telling clients when they say, "Are you going to retire?" I say, "Well, I don't have a precise plan, but it's unlikely that you're going to see me if you come back in 10 years. So." If you want to pay me extra money to get something done right away, let's do it now. The reality is probably they're unlikely to see me in 5 years, but I don't really know exactly what that looks like. My wife has been retired for about 12 years now, and she periodically says, "So when are you going to do that retirement thing? Because, it's great." And all of my colleagues and peers from law school days are either retired or dead, and so I don't know. I like what I do is kind of the problem. I feel like I go into the office and people treat me well, and I improve the quality of clients and beneficiaries' lives, though they don't always appreciate that. And what more could you ask for? It's almost as good as being on the radio. Almost.
I've had clients who've retired and they've complained that retirement was particularly difficult for them because they had no interests aside from work, which seems pretty sad to me. And I know you don't have that problem, because if we had a lot more time, I'd be getting into all the interesting things about you that I think I know, the things that you do for hobbies and the interests that you have. But do you feel like that's an integral part of this thinking about retirement, that you have so much else in your life?
Yes, there's some of that. I will share Rhonda's, my wife's, I don't know where that came from, my wife's view of this when she said she was going to retire. I think she got this from people, she was a high school science teacher, and I think she got it from colleagues who were recently retired, but she said, for a year, I'm going to say no to everything. And then after a year, I'm going to say yes to the first thing that comes up. And that really worked very well for her, I think. So for a year, she just retired, and she took birding classes and art classes. She's really quite a gifted watercolorist, by the way. You could try to make her show you something or talk to you about it. She did that, and she did the birding. And then at the end of a year, we got involved with a charitable organization. One of the members called me and said, "Wouldn't you like to be the chair of this?" And I said, "You should ask my wife, because she's primed to say yes." And she ended up doing 5 years in the trenches of this social venture partners. If any of you have social venture partners groups in your community, we love them, and we recommend them. And that's been half of the time since she retired, has been really laboring in those vineyards.
It's a good thing the first call wasn't from the pole dancers.
That's right.
You might be doing some different things right now. Well, since we're talking about it, Robert, we've only got 3 or 4 minutes here, but tell me about some of your interests. I'm very curious. I know in the past you've been a pilot. And
that's correct.
I know you are very interested in wine and...
So we are wine lovers. We had one of those giant 6-foot-tall wine coolers and immediately filled it with about, I think it's got 12 cases of wine or something. And then we had to get another one, and it's filled with another 12 cases of wine. And I now have 4 cases of wine on the floor looking for a place. We have a thing where we buy new wine every time we drink old wine, so that the wine can be aging. And I was telling this to somebody while our 43-year-old son was sitting in the room. I said, I just realized if I need to lay wine down for 10 years, I'm going to be in my 80s before I can drink it. Maybe I should stop doing that. And Eric, our son, no, Dad, don't stop.
Well, I heard this story about port, because don't you lay down port for 30 years?
Yes, I was kind of simplifying it to save a minute, but it's really about vintage port, which is my first love in wine.
So I thought we'd make the comment to the younger people in the room that if they want to get started on something like that, they'd better start now.
And come to visit us to drink some of the old port and some of the old Cabernets, and we'll turn you on to the whole... we're happy. Oh, by the way, one of the things that I do, and I did want to make sure to mention it, actually 2 things I wanted to make sure to mention. I've got like 2 minutes. One is that the thing that I'm most significant for my history at NALA is that I'm the guy who started the NALA listserv. And when NALA took over the listserv and started running their own, I kept mine around, and it's had several iterations. But there is a private listserv for elder law practitioners that I need to tell you all about if you're not on it. I call it the subversives list because it was very subversive of me to keep this list going. And if you would like to be on a private, non-NALA related list of elder law practitioners from all over the country, there are a couple hundred people on it now. It's a pretty quiet list. There are some people from New Jersey who are not invited, so that the know-it-alls aren't there. Send me an email, hand me your card with your email address on it, I'll put you on the list. And the other thing is, in spare time, I wrote 2 books. I actually wrote 4, but these 2, I shouldn't say I wrote this. Bryn wrote this, and Rebecca Morgan and I wrote her coattails. Third Party and Self-Created Trust, brand new book. The new iteration of the Cliff Cruz book. It has the most heartfelt dedication ever. Sorry. And also the Elder Law Answer book, which I no longer write. Lisa Davis writes it. And I have multiple copies of both of these things. And I brought them here to wave them around in case I got a chance. I am not taking them back, so somebody needs to persuade me that they need one or both of these books.
Thank you so much for doing this, Robert. I really appreciate it. I wish we had more time because I know some things about you that I didn't get a chance to ask about today.
I can't do martial arts demonstrations because my rule is that I don't do them after I've had alcohol and I've been drinking alcohol. Talk to me early tomorrow and we'll do martial arts.
Yeah, you're a black belt, is that what they call it?
4th degree.
And the whole family did that with you,
Rhonda's a
right?
3rd degree black belt.
That's great. And the kids did it too, didn't they?
Robin, our daughter, is a 3rd degree. Our son is a 1st degree. He gave up black belt. He gave up martial arts for ballroom dance, for tango particularly. Okay, this is running over, but it's a good story. Our senior in high school son comes to me and says, "Dad, I've been thinking about taking dance class. Would that be okay?" And I said, "Of course it would be okay. Why would it not be okay?" "Well, you know, most of the boys who are interested in dance are gay, and I wanted to make sure you weren't." I said, "Don't be absurd, of course, it's perfectly all right. But I'm curious, why do you want to do it?" He said, "Well, a friend invited me to come to the class, and I went to the class and looked around, and it's a bunch of really cute, very small women, and 2 guys, me and a gay guy, and they want me to put my hands all over their bodies." I said, "You go."
That's a good way to end it. Thank you.
Thank you.